Us tonight. So thank you all for being here. I'm Carolyn Berg. I'm with Coble Collaborative, and I'll be your moderator this evening. So we're here tonight to talk all about your region's water resources, and we'll be focused on a unique opportunity that San Luis Obispo County has as a coastal community to explore the potential for ocean desalination as one possible long-term opportunity for water supply. So we're excited to be evaluating that with the partner agencies, as well as with all of you as interested community members. And that conversation really starts here tonight with each of you. So we appreciate you making time to be with us. So as we think about the water future that our region wants to create, that takes a lot of vision and it takes community understanding and input to really explore the needs we have and look at the different possible solutions before deciding on the best path forward together. And so tonight's purpose starts first off with trying to make sure that we all start with a strong foundational understanding of our region's water resources. So we'll focus there first before we then look at both informing you and gathering input on the potential for ocean desalination, as well as sharing the specific approach for the desalination feasibility study that's underway right now and how you can engage with that. I want to note, you may have noticed on your screen, we are recording tonight's session, and that'll be posted to the county's website listed on the screen in front of you today. And that's to make sure if you have to leave before our session ends tonight, or if you know someone who couldn't join, we hope that you'll be able to go there and enjoy watching this after the fact. So I'm going to start off just walking through how we'll spend our time together this evening and give you a bit of an understanding of when you'll be engaging throughout this process as well. So tonight you're going to hear from a number of county and partner agency representatives, as well as the consultant team technical experts. And this will be mostly, I'm going to walk through the initial portion, which is mostly presentation focused, and then later on we get more into engagement with all of you. So after I close up this quick intro about the session, then I'll hand off to Courtney, and she'll be talking about the history of your region's water resources for about 10 minutes. We'll pause for a quick 10-minute Q&A, see if there's any questions already at that point. Before then, we'll jump right back in, and Courtney will start talking about the county, the region's current water resources picture and what the vulnerabilities and opportunities are. So that'll be another about 10-minute presentation, followed by a few of the local partner communities are going to give us a quick highlight of what their community is thinking about when it comes to water and why they're exploring desalination as a part of this study. And that'll be about 5 to 6 minutes there. We'll stop for another quick 10-minute Q&A. And then at this point, you'll notice that first half of this session is really focused a lot on presentation mode. And that's as I mentioned, setting that foundation of understanding early on. And then we get to the second half, it's a lot more conversational. So we'll go beyond just the Q&A, and there'll be more opportunities throughout as Lydia's presenting on the desalination feasibility study for about a half hour. Throughout that, there will be questions for all of you to answer, and we'll continue using that Mentimeter tool that you saw just a moment ago. So we hope that you'll participate throughout the night. We'll close out with some next steps so you know how you can continue to engage with the study and the long-term efforts. And then for anyone who wants to stick around, we'll have another half hour for Q&A to the extent that it's needed. So how you can participate throughout tonight, you might have already logged in. We're going to be using Mentimeter for a lot of the survey type questions throughout the presentation. And you'll see a QR code pop up, as well as Joey's dropped the website and the code for you to join into the chat here. So we'll use that throughout the evening. So please log in, scan the QR code, and you'll see that come up over and over. Once you're logged in, you can just stay on that same, the same one. You don't have to log out each time. We'll also use the Zoom chat and the Zoom raise hand function. Those won't be enabled the whole time, and that's really because we don't want to have the distracting text kind of rolling through the screen the whole time while we're presenting. But when we have the Q&A blocks, we'll have you jump in, and whether you prefer to just write in your questions or raise your hand and ask them verbally, Joey will be watching for that in the background. So those will be the ways that you can engage tonight, and don't stress out. We'll give you those instructions at each step along the way when there's an opportunity. And if you choose to participate in the Mentimeter, just know that all of those responses are anonymous and they get aggregated with the rest of the participants' responses as well. So we're going to start off with a nice easy one. If you want to go ahead and enable the chat, Joey, we're going to have everyone jump in there, say hi to your neighbors. If you can just share your name and the community you live in so that our project team and all of you know who else is here with you this evening. And while you're doing that, I'll also introduce our team that's on the call today. So as I mentioned, I'm Carolyn, I'm your moderator, and our presenters will include Courtney Howard with the County of San Luis Obispo. We have our partner agencies, Shauna Scott with the City of San Luis Obispo, Bill Robeson with City of Rio Grande, Ron Munz with Los Osos CSD, and Mark Zimmer with Golden State Water Company. They'll all be participating in that local agency spotlight that happens about midway. And then Lydia Holmes is the feasibility study project manager with Corollo Engineers, so she'll close out with the second half of the presentation. In the background, not presenting, but here helping out and listening to all of your input is the technical team. So we have Angela Ford, the county's project manager, Joey Style, who's the county's meeting host this evening, Anthony Simo and Ingo Wiersema with Corollo Engineers, and Dan Heimel with Confluence. So all of them are here listening intently to your input and here to answer questions throughout as well. Before I hand off to Courtney to go through the presentation, I know that all of you interact with water on a daily basis, if not every hour, and I'm sure we all have many thoughts about it. So we wanted to start off with just understanding when you think about water for our region's future, what words come to mind? So if you go into menti.com and type in 8875-4712 or scan that QR code, it'll let you in, and as you're seeing, as people start to input those, you'll see them popping up live right in front of you. So thank you. Yeah, jump in. Any thoughts that come to mind? And I'm going to give you about another minute and a half on this one. Just give everyone time to type it in. Yeah, thank you. So we're seeing limited, precious, delicate, drought, varied, scarce, resilience needed. Uncertain, reliability, divisive. And as the words are larger, that means multiple people have been putting in the same word probably. Give you another half minute or so on that. And thank you everyone for jumping in on that. Excited to be hearing from everyone and getting you engaged. Yeah. And as you hear me verbalizing what's on there, some folks are just joining via their phones and probably aren't seeing the screen, perhaps as they're driving home. So I'll just be giving a little flyover as you all give input throughout the evening. Okay, I'm going to give you another 15 seconds or so. So if you haven't hit send on yours, you can go ahead and drop those thoughts in right now. Amazing. Yeah, collaboration, needed, important, essential, expensive, quickly disappears. Well, thank you everyone for giving some of those initial thoughts. And like I said, we're really happy to have you here. And I think you'll get to hear a lot more about what you've just shared and more. So I'm going to hand off to Courtney Howard with the county now to jump us into the presentation.
All right, thanks, Carolyn, and thanks everyone for your input. It's certainly a precious resource, and we've been putting a lot of thought into how to manage it better. In preparing for tonight's presentation, I was reflecting on how our relationship with water has evolved over the years, particularly when we saw distributed electricity and how that at the turn of the century really helped enable our treatment of water supplies and the development of our community water systems. It really was a game changer for our quality of life. And then moving forward into the 20s and 30s, when submersible pumps were invented, it gave access to more groundwater and really led to more development and use of water. And we had our booming populations in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And even back then, they were seeing impacts to groundwater, the levels declining. And that really led to throughout the state the development of water surface reservoirs to capture stormwater or snowmelt. And so we really saw the development of a lot of lakes where dams were put on rivers and creeks to be able to store water and then let it release it or deliver it via pipelines to our different communities and for different end users. But then we started to see the impacts of using water, and it led to a lot of regulations around helping the environment and making sure the water we were putting back into the system was treated. And it also led to some financial regulations. What's commonly known as the right to vote on taxes law started back with Prop 13, and it changed the way governments needed to fund water projects. You may be familiar with Prop 218 if you live in a community that's gone through a rate increase process. So then the focus became, how do we use water more efficiently? A lot of increases in technology, especially with the digital revolution, and a lot of the satellite technologies we have really helped out with increasing our water use efficiency, and also treatment technologies and the ability to put our treated wastewater to beneficial reuse through recycled water projects. So it's really evolved over the years. And I started to think, okay, how did that play out in our community? And I wanted to share that with you through 3 lenses: how we monitor the water supply conditions, how we've planned for the future, and how we've implemented projects and programs in response to the changes we saw with our water supplies. So first, data. We collect a lot of data over the years: land use data, rainfall data, stream level data, population data. And there's 2 I want to focus in on tonight because they also help you see some of the concerns we have about our water supplies. And so since the 60s, the county has had a program where folks can volunteer their well for us to come measure twice a year so that we can look at trends in groundwater levels. And so you can see in this example, this is a well that has gone down over time. And we see that in some of our basins in certain areas. And then it's a particular concern in our coastal groundwater basins because it can draw in seawater. And once you get the salty water into the freshwater groundwater basin, it can be very hard to reverse. So that's an example of the data we collect and what it tells us. The other data set I wanted to note is rainfall and how we have these drought cycles periodically over time. And there's been a lot of concern lately about those drought periods becoming more extended and hotter, which can, be very stressful, the level of uncertainty and not knowing when that next rainfall will come and whether it will come before things go dry. So another very important metric that we're looking at, and there's been a lot of concern about. So we used all this information to do periodic evaluations. So we look at, what are the water trends in terms of current demands and future needs, and what is the current status of our supplies, and how much do we think those supplies can serve us going forward. And if these evaluations show that there's an imbalance, then the studies and plans talk about what can we do to enhance our water supply or use our water in a more efficient manner. And this has led to agreements to secure water back in the 50s and 60s. Up until today, our integrated regional water management plan has been leveraged to go after grants for local water supply projects, and we've brought in over $30 million through that program. So the planning part of water supply security is very important. And then going into our supplies, groundwater is and continues to be our primary water supply in our county. In the colored areas, the red and the blue, those are our defined groundwater basins. So they have a definable bottom and sides. And then the areas that are not in a red or blue color, you find groundwater in fractured rock formations. And then all of the dots you see are all of the wells that have been drilled over time. So again, consistent with what we saw at a statewide level, we also saw reservoirs and lakes being built in our county over that same period of time, starting with Santa Margarita Lake, also known as Salinas Reservoir. Salinas Dam was put on the Salinas River by the War Department actually in the 1940s for Camp San Luis Obispo. But the war ended, and then the water storage rights transferred to the city of San Luis Obispo, and so that water supply serves that community today. And then next we have Whale Rock Reservoir that was built through a partnership with the state, and it also serves the city of San Luis Obispo, along with Cal Poly, California Men's Colony, and Cayucas. Next, Lopez Lake was built through an agreement and partnership of various communities in the South County. And the next one was State Water. Back in the 70s, the main aqueduct was built, but it wasn't until the 90s that the county, state, and water agencies in Santa Barbara County agreed it was time to develop the coastal branch to bring the water allocation to the two counties. And state water goes to 11 agencies in our county. And then we have Nosmano Lake. Again, an agreement back in the 50s secured an allocation for SLO County, but it wasn't until the late 2000s that the pipeline distributed to 5 communities was built. So that kind of went along with what the state was doing also with different building different reservoirs. But we also have our recycled water programs. So in addition to all of the septic systems that are out there that recharge the groundwater areas and other systems that property owners can do with on-site systems, about 70% of our treated wastewater from our communities is put to beneficial reuse through in various ways. It either goes back into the system through through recharge into groundwater basins or groundwater areas, or it serves to enhance flow in creeks and rivers for the environment. And also there are some cases of direct delivery for landscape irrigation. So that's our recycled water picture. And then it is important to note that these types of projects do take time. It takes time from the concept of doing this project to deciding it's time to implement it, to designing it, to negotiating agreements, going through funding agreements and votes, and really all the way through construction and getting all the regulatory agencies to permit this project to be built. So it can take a lot of time. And these are just a few examples of the ones I've gone over, how long it's taken. So hand in hand with water supply enhancement projects, we have water use efficiency measures. And these are implemented either via compliance with regulations or on a voluntary basis. So the communities we have circled here on the map are subject to the Urban Water Management Planning Act through the state. So they're subject to certain conservation regulations as an example. And then in response to some of the droughts, there have been statewide measures for water use efficiency that apply to everyone. And in addition to that, we have growth and land use management regulations. So the county and incorporated cities that have land use authority can implement growth in a way that growth management ordinances in a way that matches what the water supplies can provide over time. And another example is the county has developed a conservation program such as retrofit for sale and cash for grass programs in the Paso Robles Basin area, the Napomo Mesa area, and in Los Osos. And then we have management of our groundwater basins. In response to declining levels, seawater intrusion, or other conflicts over water rights, some of our basins are either subject to court oversight, and then some of our basins are subject to the state's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So those are also mechanisms on the demand management side of water.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of our history. And so we have a moment here before I talk about what we're currently working on and looking at in the near term.
Thanks, Courtney. And for anyone who has a question they want, Joey's going to go ahead and enable the chat again. So you can drop your questions in writing if you'd rather, or if you'd like to be able to come off mute and share that way, you can just raise your hand under the reactions toolbar on your on the Zoom screen. So we'll see if there's, I don't see any questions yet. Joey, are you seeing any hands raised just yet?
I don't see any hands raised as of yet. And just to reiterate what Carolyn said, if you would like to speak, you can raise your hand by clicking on the reactions button in the Zoom toolbar. And if you've dialed in, you can press *9 as well if you're calling in from your phone.
Thanks, Joey. It's all right. If you're still stewing over some questions, we'll have more opportunities, so that's okay too. So you'll have another chance in just another 10 or 15 minutes if one comes up. All right. I want to do one more last check. Joey, anybody got hands raised before we jump back in?
Yeah, let's see. I don't see any questions at this moment.
All right, thanks. And thanks, everyone. All right, Courtney, I'm going to hand back to you and I'll move forward.
All right. So why is water management so hard? Well, you know, it's important for everyone, as we saw in that first kind of survey question. And at the same time, everyone has their own perspective on water. There's a lot of things to consider in terms of, different, whether you have a home, you have a certain need for water, and that may be different than how much water a farm needs versus what time of year a fish needs the water to flow. But all of it's important for a healthy society, and affordability is different for everyone. So it can really be challenging to work through all of those concerns and ways to look at what strategies to implement with water supply. And that's why it's really important for decision makers and water users to work together to try to figure out, how reliable do we want our water to be versus how much risk are we willing to, withstand. And there can be uncertainty there. And it's kind of different. The degree of risk is different for everyone. The other thing to weigh is how long to wait. We've seen that it can be more expensive if we wait to build structures later versus knowing what we need now. So those are, some of the challenges to work through amongst, water users and decision makers when we're looking at these different opportunities and ways to address water needs. So with that background, the good news is that our water use efficiency has been successful, and so that really does need to continue. The trends are showing that even though population is increasing, our water use is remaining stable. So our per capita, per person use has really declined with these voluntary and regulatory efforts. So the different ways, the next slide shows some different ways that we've accomplished that through converting our landscaping, either on a voluntary basis or through cash for grass programs, or with new development, they already have requirements to use a certain amount of drought-tolerant landscaping. On the farms, they've really leveraged technology to be more efficient with our irrigation systems. Our local resource conservation districts also have a mobile irrigation lab where they can go around to different farms and help them dial in their efficiency. And then property owners have also built retention systems or other ways to kind of slow the flow and let it recharge into the groundwater basin, and as well as any other kind of strategies they've implemented on their own to reuse water on their properties. So that has been successful, and we hope to see more of it going forward. We also have water supply that's available under various circumstances, and a lot of discussions are happening now on how to put this available water to use. So, for example, the Nasmena Water Project, the communities that signed up for that water supply had a certain growth projection. And since they haven't reached those populations yet, there is water available for a limited time. So that's being looked at. And then with state water, although it fluctuates in a lot of years, we do have water available. And we've done a study of that pipeline, and it shows that there's additional capacity to put water through it. There's some water rights on the Salinas River that haven't been put to full use yet. And then we have a few treated wastewater systems that discharge to the ocean that could be, a portion at least, could be put back to reuse. So we do have some water supply opportunities that are currently being looked at in various venues. On the next slide, I kind of mentioned a few of those. So there's a Nosmiano Water Commission. They meet publicly, and you could engage through that group to weigh in on the use of Nosmiano water while it's available. Same with the State Water Advisory Committee. They have public meetings and are having ongoing discussions of how to put that water to use. The Countywide Water Resources Advisory Committee meets once a month, and they also review a lot of the water supply strategies as well as conservation strategies. And these are just some examples in addition to your local elected officials, whether it's the Board of Supervisors or City Council. Their public meetings are also, of course, another opportunity to provide input on these decisions that are being looked at in the near term. So some of you may be thinking, why bother with those other ones? Let's just build a desal facility. Well, under the current regulations, the state is telling us we need to optimize the use of our existing strategies through conservation and reuse before we look at desal. So that is, it is going to be an important part of communicating what we're doing here locally in an integrated fashion to meet our water needs going forward. And then maybe others are saying, well, with that water supply and with conservation, I don't think we need desal. So what if rainfall patterns do change? Because projects take time, it is important to start planning for next generation water supplies. So this is what this project's about, to be as ready as we can be when we want to move forward as a community. And we have a lot of partners. The county just wanted to make sure that the water agencies also wanted to look at this. And these are all the agencies that have come forward to work with us on looking at these opportunities. And we have 3 of those agencies here today, and they're going to spend a few minutes sharing their perspective. And first up, we have Shauna from the city of San Luis Obispo.
Thank you, Courtney. Shauna Scott, I'm a Special Projects Manager with the City of San Luis Obispo Utility Department. Our Utilities Department's mission is to ensure essential utilities services to our city community, including provision of safe and reliable potable water. Our general plan water and wastewater element includes goals, policies, and programs to ensure a long-term reliable water supply to meet both current and future water demand associated with the development envisioned under our general plan, utilize multiple water resources to meet its water supply needs, and work cooperatively on regional water issues and water resource planning. The city's current sources of drinking water consist of 3 surface reservoirs, which are dependent on rainfall. The city has also started construction of the groundwater treatment project to diversify city water sources by establishing 2 groundwater wells. Irrigation water demand is offset by the use of recycled water. As a result of long-term water source planning set in motion decades ago and our community's diligent commitment to the city's water conservation programs, we have more than 10 years of water available under a continued drought scenario with our current water supply and demand conditions based on the build-out of our general plan. Regionally, the reliability of water sources that depend on rainfall are predicted to be affected by climate change and drought, changing rainfall frequency, time of year and amounts, environmental regulations, and population growth. Anticipating these impacts on water supply and further diversifying sources with the goal of ensuring water availability under these conditions will increase water supply resiliency for future generations. Looking ahead, decades into the future, a new drought-proof local water supply may be an optimal strategy. And one of these options may be a regional desalination facility that would serve multiple water suppliers across the county. We appreciate the opportunity to participate during this initial planning study and value the community's interest and time to join us all this evening. And now I'll pass this over to Bill Robeson with the City of Arroyo Grande.
Thank you, Shauna. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Robeson. I am the Assistant City Manager and Public Works Director for the City of Arroyo Grande. When I'm talking about our community and our city, I'm really talking about our City Council's efforts and approvals on their perspective and the community's perspective on water. So our council's goals are set each year, and we always, or at least for the past 10 years or so, we've had an ongoing assessment of additional water sources as one of our city's top goals. And that seems to be very consistent for our citizens as well. So we have water sustainability as a high priority on that list. And our current efforts, we are looking at proposing a state water ballot measure in 2026. And at this current time, we only have emergency water that we can use for from state water. We're looking at a source of state water as a non-emergency source once again. So under continued conservation efforts, we have a really robust conservation program. Courtney mentioned a few things like Cash for Grass. We have a very robust education and outreach program, and we have rebates for upgrading your washing machine and toilets. Just as an example, in 2007, we had 190 gallons per person per day, and in our current year, 2025, we're down to 105 gallons per person per day. So that's an 85 gallon decrease, and that translates to about 1.5 million gallons per day of reduction. So that's a really impactful program for us, but conservation alone is not going to achieve our goal of water sustainability. So another effort is the intertie or an interconnection with Golden State Water to have another source of emergency water that can flow between Nipomo and our city of Arroyo Grande. Under challenges, there are abundant challenges, but drought conditions are a huge one. As you can see on the slide, the unpredictability is kind of shown there. Back in December of 2022, the reservoir Lopez Lake was down to close to 20,000 acre feet. And then in January of 2023, it luckily filled up, which was a really great transpiration of weather for us. So we've reached the low reservoir response plan, which is again that 20,000 acre foot level at Lake Lopez. And we've reached that 3 times, and for about a 5 years, a 5-year period out of a 23-year record. So 3 times a 5-year combined time frame out of that 23 years. And the low reservoir response plan triggers significant increases in conservation, limitations on use, increased penalties for overuse, reduced agency allocation. So that is a really difficult and significant threshold for us. Going to groundwater sustainability, that's part of our portfolio. We have about 1,500 acre feet for the city of Arroyo Grande. And then obviously groundwater recharge by surface water is something that's been talked about here, and it's pretty obvious for everybody to see. So it's something that we want to make sure that it's a sustainable source. And then lastly, Lopez litigation is an unpredictable and unexpected challenge for us, and it's the litigation is based on the takings of endangered species. It has already caused increases in our downstream flows. So more water coming out of the reservoir to allegedly support the ecology that goes down the stream, Arroyo Grande Creek. This has caused us to reevaluate our medium and long-term water sources. A source that does not rely on rain can have such great possibilities, and is just such an excellent thing to strive for in the future. So all of these points, all combined, has pushed our city and our city council to continue to look at sustainability and to partner on this effort. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
I'd like to introduce Ron, or actually Mark Zimmer and Ron Munns, who are representing the community of Los Osos.
Thank you, Bill. Good evening. Mark Zimmer, General Manager for Golden State Water Company. Golden State Water is water provider for 4 small systems in San Luis Obispo County, one of those Los Osos. And today I'm here to talk about the conditions of Los Osos and why Los Osos is a candidate to really benefit from a DESAL project that provides a unique opportunities for communities, these small communities like Los Osos. So if you look at Los Osos specifically, 100% reliant on groundwater creates challenges that you have one basin, one source of water, and you have to manage that water source. We've been dependent on that. There's 3 water purveyors in Los Osos, all serving the community through this source of supply. In addition, there's some water quality challenges. Right next to the ocean, we have seawater intrusion along with nitrates, and we're challenged with managing these water quality, the water quality from the groundwater basin. And then the fact that we're geographically isolated from other water purveyors, or the ability to interconnect with other systems, makes it challenging, and we're solely dependent on this groundwater basin. So if we look at the basin specifically, it is an adjudicated basin. The purveyors, along with the county, are all managing the basin. We have a basin plan that really allows us to maximize the use of the basin. There's a lot of resources, actions, efforts that are intended primarily to implement a basin plan and collaborate and utilize and sustain the basin long term. One of the projects that we're currently working on, the lead agency is the Los Osos Community Service District at this point, but we're looking at a state water connection to bring waters in. This would be a quicker response than the DESAL is a long-term planning for resiliency, but having the state water project connection makes sense today to bring these waters into the basin. I think at this point, I'll turn it over to Ron and let him comment a little bit about the state water and some of the benefits of the DESAL project.
Thank you, Mark. Ron Munns, General Manager of Los Osos Community Services District. We're excited about the state water project to connect to the Chorro Valley state water pipeline. We're working diligently with the county. As Courtney mentioned earlier, there is water available, and we're excited about completing this project and being able to import water for the first time. What we see, though, and Mark alluded to, is because we're dependent solely on a groundwater basin, we need this intertie to the outside world, to the regional water infrastructure. So we have that long-term water supply resiliency, which is the goal we're striving for. And though we understand state water can be at least a temporary solution, we understand that DESAL is that longer-term solution out in the future with climate change and all the other unknowns that we have in this county. And that regional collaboration will spread the cost and the benefits over the entire San Luis Obispo County region if we band together as water agencies. So we're excited about being one of the participants in this project, and I'll turn it back over to Courtney and Carolyn.
Wonderful. Thank you. Courtney, any final thoughts?
Just thank you for the various communities sharing their perspective, it really really helps to round out our story for our county at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Courtney, Bill, Shauna, Mark, and Ron for painting that picture. What I'd love to do is go ahead and Joey, if you could enable the chat again and the raise hand function. So everyone, if you had any questions, you can drop them into the chat now. Or as Joey mentioned earlier, you can go down under reactions and find the raise hand icon that's shown here on the screen. So find that on your toolbar and you can raise your hand and Joey can bring you off mute or ask you to. So anything on what we've just talked about with water resources throughout your region. We have one question coming in, Courtney. So is stormwater capture truly being utilized to its maximum?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had a kind of a year-long effort to look into that in cooperation with our Water Resources Advisory Committee. Because of the way rain falls in our county, and after you account for what the ecosystems needs, the cost benefit is pretty challenging to do in terms of a regional infrastructure project. Also depends on property owners participating along those rivers and creek systems. So for now, we just have, on a voluntary basis in our county, various larger landowners working towards slowing the flow on their property, in addition to regulations that are in place for development to make sure that whatever water lands on the property gets infiltrated back in to the property.
Great. Okay, thanks, Courtney. I'm going to go to some of our raised hands, then we'll go back into the chat and we'll get to as many as possible in 10 minutes and then can save some for later. So, Joey, do you want to bring Stacy?
Yeah, I could take over here. Okay, Stacy, you're all set to speak. You should see an unmute button pop up and you should be able to unmute.
Yes, I think I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry I came to this late. I was in a meeting. I'm on the city council in Pismo Beach, and I'm wondering if Pismo Beach gave a presentation.
We only had 3 partners come just for the sake of time, and those are the 3 that have volunteered for this particular presentation.
Okay, well, will there be other presentations? Because I know Pismo Beach is interested in being part of this project.
Do you want to speak to if they're on the partner? Are they one of the current DESAL plan partners, Courtney?
I believe we are we not?
Yes.
I just wanted to confirm that. So yeah, there'll be one more community session later on in the project. And as Courtney said, just for sake of time, had a few volunteers that helped out tonight. But thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right.
All
Joey?
right, yeah. Moving on. Floyd, you should be able to unmute.
Okay, yes, Floyd Wicks. I've actually got 2 hats I wear. One is as a board member for Montecito Water District. And speaking to that, there was a comment made earlier about the state really looking more to have local reuse of wastewater in place before going to desalination. But what we're finding, and we did an extensive study with Montecito Water and Montecito Sanitary District. The cost of recycling water today is literally about 50% or more higher than if we would utilize desalination, which our district did. We now have a 50-year contract to purchase about 40% of our supply from the desal plant in Santa Barbara. And literally, we have the numbers showing what the cost of recycling would be, and it's way up there, up $7,000–8,000 an acre foot compared to $4,500 roughly for desal. Still high cost, but we can count on the water. That's what everybody's saying. It's reliable. And one thing, just another point of reference, our district actually looked to change the law in California. We were not successful, but we wanted the state to look at ocean water in a different light, namely that it's truly stormwater capture and recycling of wastewater, which dumps 1.5 billion gallons a day along the coast of California into the ocean. So ocean water is nothing more than runoff, rainfall, and recycled or treated wastewater. So I'll have more to say later, but I wanted to get those points out there because I think we have to go back to the state and kind of hit them between the eyes somewhere to get their attention on what the ocean really represents. It is truly recycling.
Thank you, Floyd. And I wonder, related to that, I see a question in the chat, Courtney, and thank you for offering those points, Floyd. So Brad had asked, why isn't the county supporting wastewater reclamation instead of desalination? Sounds like in a similar vein.
Yeah, so I'll start with the last speaker. We'll hear a little bit more from Lydia about the feasibility study and the required elements. One of the elements is the alternatives analysis. So that'll be part of the discussion in demonstrating need and different alternatives that are being looked at. So we'll be able to, kind of pull into that narrative what studies have been done throughout our county on recycled water and different cost estimates that have been developed. So we'll be able to pull that in when we get to the point of this study of getting to the costing of different options. So Lydia's going to kind of go over where that kind of fits in. And then in terms of our historical support of treated wastewater, community wastewater systems, implementing recycled water projects, we've done a regional recycled water study. And so we did do an analysis of where it could happen. But since we don't own those facilities, it really at that point needs to be the agencies that own those wastewater treatment plants to move to those next steps. And so at that point, we would make sure that it's a part of the story in terms of all the things we're doing in the county, the various entities, what they're doing in order to try to, as a whole for our county, become more resilient and use our water more efficiently.
Thanks, Courtney. Joey, do you want to ask? I see a hand raised.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Carolyn. Judy Lynn, you should be able to unmute now.
Hello, everyone. Judy Lynn in Morro Bay. And I appreciate everyone's information. And of course, having water for our entire county is something that we definitely want to plan for. Now, here in Morro Bay, we did plan for it back in the 80s when we had a bit of a problem. And we started making plans and built a desal plant. And then we also obtained state water, and we also have our wells. So we're set here in Morro Bay. My concern might be a little bit premature, but in looking at where you plan to have this desal plant, and since we are right on the coast, I just want to remind y'all that Morro Bay residents passed Measure A24 just this last year, and we made it clear that we do not want industrial projects on our former PG&E power plant property or anywhere in Morro Bay. We have served our time hosting industry for the county and are now left with a toxic monstrosity that the county will not help us remove. So we have just a little bit of a problem with hosting that. I hope you guys will understand that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. Appreciate that. Okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And we will get into some of the initial thinking on the feasibility study in a moment. I think we've got time for just one more question here. It's maybe a big one, so if we need to hold off till later, Courtney, just let me know. But Keith asked, we'll get into, I see a question about estimated costs, so I think we'll cover that a little bit later. Keith is asking, more water supply security is critical, but with more water, many folks fear growth will follow quickly thereafter. So how can growth be contained?
Yeah, that goes back to land use management strategies that the entities, it's incorporated cities and the county have that authority to develop their general plans in a way that it can be done in a way to manage growth. And so there's public processes through updating those land use plans that can set those growth rates in a sustainable manner. But yeah, that is the concern. If you remove some barriers, to development, but then that's weighted against the need for housing and any other kind of state mandates that these land use entities are dealing with and looking at the future and how to accommodate all the needs.
Thank you, Courtney. Well, thank you everyone for offering up some of your questions and points in this early on part of the process. And to those who are just joining, we're just wrapping up this picture of regional water. And I think, Courtney, unless you had do you have any final points?
No, but I'll be back at the end to address any more questions if needed. I appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you. And with that, we'll hand off to Lydia to start talking about desalination.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. So I'm going to give an overview of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation feasibility study. You want to go to the next slide? I'm going to be starting off by talking about this figure that you can find on the county's website. And it lays out some of the things that Courtney talked about before, that it takes a long time to implement a project. So it's the little figure up in the kind of upper right shows we're talking decades to implement a desal facility. And really what we're doing right now is just the beginning phases of looking at the feasibility. The county was awarded a grant by the Bureau of Reclamation to be able to do some of this work. And so that's what we're doing in what's shown here as phase 2A, is looking at alternatives, vetting those options, coming up with some costs and shortlisting. And then in the future, if it looks, positive, if there's, a go decision and that go, no go, then you can conduct more detailed studies as a region and continue to work on this. Okay, next slide. So when you are doing a Bureau-funded feasibility study, as I mentioned, there's a grant that's paying for this. There are required elements that the Bureau makes you do. And so some of these are listed here, and Courtney alluded to these earlier. You do have to discuss a statement of problem and needs over 20 years. It's not just today. You have to describe alternatives, do economic analysis, look at things like environmental impacts and institutional requirements and research needs. So a lot of different things that we'll be doing as we're putting this feasibility study together. So next slide, I want to start with, though, kind of the basics of what is seawater or ocean water desalination. Maybe you all know this, but just in case. It's really a transformation of seawater into drinking water through treatment. And what I'm showing in the image here is from the City of Santa Barbara's website. As was already mentioned by a speaker, Santa Barbara does have desalination, and it is a nice graphic to kind of show that process. So you have water that comes from the ocean, goes through reverse osmosis membranes, and then does post-treatment stabilization, and then goes off to your drinking water users, and there is a salty waste that is sent back to the ocean. That's essentially what desalination is. So next slide. So when we're looking at ocean desalination, there's two primary methods that can be used: reverse osmosis or distillation. The current industry standard is RO, or reverse osmosis. And as I already mentioned, it does create a waste product that's a salty brine that has to be discharged back to the ocean via an outfall, which is just another word for a pipe out into the ocean. And there are alternative technologies that exist. However, they really are just variations of the existing technology. But we have a few shown on the next slide here, some examples. So there's a lot of work being done right now on these alternative technologies, really looking at trying to come up with ways to save energy and have less environmental impacts. And so those can be that they're trying to use wave power to offset energy use, or the depth of water to help with energy savings, or different intake configurations. So it's great that these are all proceeding along, and I think has a lot of potential for the future. However, none are currently permitted or at full-scale operation in California. There's several that are working on pilots. But so at this stage of our feasibility study, it's going to be very hard to determine costs and what it's going to take to implement these kinds of projects. But they're definitely worth looking at in the future. Like I already mentioned, we've got decades before we're really talking about trying to get something online. You have time to let these technologies mature. All right, next slide, please. So it's important to talk about what the state of California's position is on ocean desal. On this slide, there's a few covers of some of the reports that are available online, State Water Board's website. And what the state has said is that desal is an important alternative source of potable water. In fact, there's a goal to increase desalination by 84,000 acre feet a year by 2040. And then the Ocean Plan, California Ocean Plan, is another document that's really important to lay out the requirements for how you implement these types of facilities to be protective of marine ecosystems. And they lay out preferred technologies. And I'm going to talk about preferred technologies a little bit more, so you'll hear me referring that term. Okay. So, but before we get there, I do want to kind of address the question of, are other people using desal? Well, I've already talked about Santa Barbara. So your neighbors to the south do have an operating system, as does Carlsbad in San Diego County. It's a very large desal facility down there. There are a couple others that are currently in development in Monterey and Orange County in Doheny, and several smaller ones as shown in this figure, which is from the state website again. So it is definitely a resource that is being looked at and being utilized. Okay, so what are the benefits and limitations of desalination? I think this is important to just get on the table, and we're going to let you have your turn to weigh in on this in just a minute. But for benefits, it provides a local, high-quality drinking water. It's drought resilient, or you could say drought resistant, because it's not tied to rainfall, really. And it also, therefore, can be a good safeguard against unpredictable water shortages. So some of the limitations and concerns with desal are that it's expensive to construct and also to operate. It has high power use. It's also very difficult to permit, particularly in California. A lot of people point to Israel as examples of desal. They do not have the same kind of regulations that California does. And it's for a good reason. We want to be careful to mitigate our environmental impacts. So that's why it's difficult to permit. And the systems are not very flexible for turning off and running only occasionally. And we definitely saw that as a lessons learned in Santa Barbara. They originally constructed their desal facility in the 90s when we were having extreme droughts in California. And then it started raining as soon as they had it up and running. And so they turned it off and didn't run it for years. And when we started having droughts again, they couldn't get it back up and running, and had to invest a lot of money to get it back running again. So really, these systems need to be run at least at a low level so that they're maintained and in use and ready to be ramped up when you need it. Okay, next slide. So we're going to stop there and give you a chance to weigh in, starting the two questions that I really had on the last slide, but starting with, what are the benefits of ocean desal in SLO County that you see?
Thanks, Lydia. And for everyone, if in case you weren't here at the beginning, you can either scan with your phone or tablet the QR code in the corner, or go to menti.com. It's in the chat, and type in the code 8875-4712. So we're going to start off with benefits and opportunities, and the next question's concerns. So you can hold those till the next one. And just like last time, in case people are listening on the phone and can't see the screen, I'll just give little updates throughout, but I'm going to give about another minute and a half on this one. So we're seeing things like drought-free, diversification, regionally available. Reliability seems to be popping up a number of times. Resilience. And for those who haven't joined yet, we'd love for you to jump on there, and don't worry, your answers are anonymous on Mentimeter, so you can share whatever's on your mind for this and the future slides. We're seeing local control. Just kind of about another half minute if you want to add any more thoughts to this. Diversification's bubbling up a few more times. All right, so click send on your final thoughts here. Cheaper than Starbucks. Okay, great. And with that, and I do see a hand raised, and I'll just note real quick, we've got a Q&A at the end of this, so we'll come back to any questions or raised hands at the end. But for now, we'll stick to the Mentimeter surveys throughout Lydia's presentation. Okay, Lydia, I'm going to hand back to, oh no, we've got the concerns. So now we'll click to the next slide. So what are your concerns with ocean desalination in Slow County? Same idea, you can scan the QR code or go through the website here. We're seeing cost as a worry, taste, marine life impacts, transmission hurdles, expense, concerned if we don't have it, no concerns, ocean habitat, life cycle costs, funding, high energy. Great, yeah, thanks everyone for giving all of these thoughts. Out of town builders, perhaps ugly. Industrialized coastline. Yeah, a lot of concerns, some of which Lydia was just touching on too. So good to see those shared. So we've got about, let's see, about 15 more seconds if you want to put your final thoughts in there before we keep on learning more about desalination and what the study's showing. All right, Lydia, I'm going to hand back to you.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks everyone for your input on this. It's helpful for us as we start looking at screening options. And so that's really what I'm going to start talking about next. So we have a screening process that we're using to narrow down the different options to get to some viable projects and portfolios. So the process is shown schematically here. We're starting with identifying potential sites and then doing screening on those. And then once we have a handful of sites, and I'll be talking about that more in just a second, we are then developing up to 12 concept alternatives, doing some additional screening, and then coming up with 5 concept alternatives that we want to advance further. And one of the things that we're doing in particular for those 5 is developing costs. So I think I did see a question on that chat that talked about that. So costs we don't have developed yet, but we will be coming up with costs for 5 options. And then using different screening criteria to compare those 5 different options. Okay, next slide. So starting off with siting. So what makes a good site for desal? I mentioned earlier about the state of California's preferred technologies. And really what those are 2 major things that we need to address. One is a subsurface intake beneath the ocean floor coastal wells. And that's kind of represented by the upper right-hand graphic, where we're trying to pull salt water, not fresh water. And we're trying to do it below the surface. And I have some additional slides on that. So I'll talk about it in a second. And the next preferred technology is related to those waste products that I talked about, the brine discharges to an outfall, which again is a pipeline into the ocean. So the preference of the state is that you have other sources of water to mix your brine discharge with, and that would be wastewater. And they want it to be a fresh source so that you're reducing salinity going out into the ocean. And the other component of the outfall is that they want you to have a multi-diffuser port configuration for rapid mixing. And so to explain what that means in more common speak, go back. The graphic on the bottom is the example of the multi-port, where you have a pipe that is going out into the ocean. And what it really means is that you're discharging in multiple places. And so that's what multiple ports is. And the idea is then it's spreading out the mixing zone a bit so that you don't have one giant slug of salty water coming out in one location. Okay, so next slide. So this is the example of the subsurface intakes that I mentioned are the preferred technology. There's several different types of technologies, but these are a couple examples. One is on the left, the vertical wells. This is a configuration that is pretty similar to groundwater wells, right? You sink a hole, you pull water out of it, but you're doing it near the coast so that you're pulling water in from the ocean into that well. Another example of subsurface intake is a slant well, where you're doing at an angle, a pipeline out in underneath the ocean floor, and then you're pulling the water in that way. So these are perforated pipes, of course. And so the idea with both of these, or any subsurface intake, is that you're pulling the water through sand or through the soil, rather than having an open intake, like an open pipe where fish could get caught. So it's more protective for marine life. Okay, next slide. So as we were looking at sites, we needed to start with, okay, where are suitable sites for subsurface intakes? And we did that through a couple different ways. One was looking at geologic maps, which is the map in the background. And the second way was verifying what we were finding on the maps with aerial imaging to make sure that it was indeed sandy soils. Because what we're looking for is essentially sand coming up to the land. So the map in light yellow is where the yellow comes to the land, is where you have sandy soils all the way up to the land. So what we don't want is rocky, because you can't get a subsurface pipe into rock. Okay, next slide. So where we landed with this evaluation was there were 16 sites that were found suitable for subsurface intakes along the coastline of the county. They're shown here. This map is a little clearer than the last one, where the yellow coming inland are those sandy soils that are suitable, and the dark gray are rock and other kinds of not suitable soils. So you start seeing, if we're going to follow the state's guidelines for a preferable intake, that, where the locations need to be. And then the next thing we did is take those locations and pair them up with the outfall. I mentioned that, you know, we have to have outfall for our waste product, and that the preference is for it to be blended with wastewater discharges. So this map shows those identified intake locations paired up with the crosses, which are all of the outfalls located on the coastline. So now we're starting to, you know, get that pairing of what would actually be feasible. So next slide. We also wanted to look at the marine environment and the protection that you know, different land use protection areas. So on the left, we see that there are national marine sanctuaries and state marine conservation areas and reserves. And so this is something that we need to factor in on, is it going to be permittable in these types of land uses? And then on the right, if we have rocky reefs and kelp, those are areas that are more rich in marine life. So we need to be paying attention to whether we're siting in those kinds of areas as well. So that was another consideration for looking at siting. And then the final consideration was proximity to regional conveyance infrastructure. We would like to be able to utilize existing infrastructure and be able to develop partner interties. So by layering on this existing infrastructure onto the sites, which are shown in the little dots, and the infrastructure was shown on some earlier maps that Courtney had, it helps us start to identify new infrastructure that would be needed for these different locations. Okay, so that really landed us at no, that's okay. Go ahead to the next one, Carolyn. Thank you. What were the screening criteria for the siting assessments? And so I talked about each one of these. They really were intake location. Is it suitable for subsurface intakes? Outfall location, and you know, where's there an outfall? Is there flow? Is there capacity? The environmental impacts, the land impacts, and then conveyance infrastructure required. So I think we're pausing here and letting you have a turn to say what are the screening criteria that are important to you as we think about siting.
Yes, thanks, Lydia. And same as with the prior questions, we're in Mentimeter. So if you haven't joined in there yet, scan that QR code or go to menti.com and put in the code. And Joey has put that into the chat. And you can go ahead and decide between those factors. And this is just talking about location again, as Lydia mentioned. And in a moment, as folks start to join in, you'll see yeah, live responses too. I'm going to give about 1.5 minutes from now. Let me move that QR code. There you go. So we're seeing conveyance infrastructure and existing outfalls, environmental impacts being important. Intake location as well. So we've got about half of you have responded, so I'm going to let you keep on going, and I want to slow you down as you're ranking these different criteria. Okay. It's got about another 15 seconds or so. If you're still moving your rankings around, you wrap that up and go ahead and click submit. And again, I do see the hand raised. Leave your hands raised so that when we get to the Q&A, Joey and I are keeping track of that too as we go along. Okay, great. Lydia, I'm going to go ahead and hand back to you.
Great, thank you. All right, so thanks for providing input on the siting criteria. When we use those same criteria, we came up with some consolidated sites for further evaluation, and these represent a geographic location, not really an exact location. And how we arrived at these was applying those criteria, but also removing the sites that had unsuitable hydrogeology. And one example of this is the Diablo Canyon Power Plant, and I'm sure there could be some questions on that, but that is a very rocky area that does not have suitable hydrogeology. So for a subsurface intake, we also are looking at trying to use those existing outfalls wherever possible. So really tried to locate those near the outfalls, and recognizing that some of the locations are going to require new outfalls. So let me walk through the sites really quickly. The Cambria area, there is an outfall in San Simeon, but it's very small. So we're probably going to have to do a outfall for that area. The Morro Strand area, we're looking at using Cayucas's outfall. Morro Bay has an outfall. Avila Beach has a very small outfall that also we probably would have to do a new outfall for. And then near the South Slope County wastewater treatment plant, they have capacity. And then the Napomo Mesa refinery is, I'm sure many of you know, that's a brownfield site that's ripe for redevelopment, and they do have an outfall, although no flow in it right now. So those are the sites that we evaluated for carrying forward to make alternatives out of. So I want to move now from sites to alternative development. What is an alternative? So an alternative is the site that we just talked about, those 6 sites that are for an ocean intake, outfall, and desal treatment facility. We need to layer onto that what's the size of facility that could be supported based on the existing outfall capacity limitations. And then we need to layer on, okay, who are the end users that would take this water, and what are their demands, and what are the potential exchanges that we could do for water. And then once we understand who's going to participate, then we can start figuring out what's the conveyance that's needed for delivery and exchanges. So that's really what we're going to be talking about next, is how we are forming these alternatives. So we had talked about site already, and I started talking about outfall a little bit, but wanted to show this graphic that explains what I was saying about small capacity outfalls versus larger. So the dashed lines for each of these locations indicates the available capacity that is currently unused. The light green is what the average flows in those outfalls is right now. And the numbers on top are how much capacity is available. So, and I do want to note, MGD is million gallons per day for people who don't speak water speak. So you can see that there are a couple larger outfalls that have more capacity, and several that are quite small that would not allow for a very large facility. Okay, next slide. So then I also said we need to figure out who's participating. So how we started going about this was looking at each of our partners and what is their needs. And so we did a survey of the partner agencies, asked them to let us know how DESAL could fit in with their current needs or future needs or planning for uncertainty. And all that information really helps us create those project alternatives. And this pie graph shows where that really fits in. The current partner requests were for current shortfalls and drought resilience, and some for future growth. And it ended up being a pretty small slice of the overall water use pie for the county. But I do want to note that the groundwater includes groundwater use for more than just domestic. So there's other opportunities to maybe take it further than just these direct requests. And so that's what I want to talk about next, is what are the scenarios that we want to consider? Go ahead and go to the next slide. What are the scenarios we want to consider as we're developing desal alternatives to maybe go beyond just the partner requests in the dark blue box or hexagon? What are some of the other supply needs that can be met? Well, you heard Bill from Arroyo Grande talk about the legal flow cutback at Lopez. So, helping make up that difference for Lopez users, maybe that might be one avenue. Providing a drought contingency for other communities. Even looking at sustainable groundwater needs, Courtney talked about the declining groundwater levels and that there is a state requirement that basins be managed sustainably. So maybe there's water that can be made available to get people off of groundwater. So really what the goal is for us to develop alternatives that can meet a range of needs. So we're trying to take a bookend approach where we look at a range of options ranging from local to regional users, small versus large flows, varied locations throughout the county, which I think you already see from our siting narrowing down, and then many versus few end users. So trying to come up with that bookend. And so we're going to pause here. So the next option, next slide is we want to hear what your priorities would be for developing alternatives, thinking about those different bookends.
Thanks, Lydia. And so again, QR code or menti.com to join us if you haven't already. And when you open it, you'll see the full question, but what are your priorities? And your options are small local projects. So thinking about few users, meeting those critical partner requests Lydia just talked about, or medium regional projects, the second option, relying on exchange agreements, more users, meeting some direct requests for partners and drought needs. Or the third option for medium regional projects is with new infrastructure, more users, meets more partner requests, drought needs, and offset cutbacks. And that final large regional project is with new infrastructure, many users, meets all partner requests, drought needs, offset cuts back, and groundwater sustainability. And I'm going to move that QR code out of your way. I'll give you about another minute on that one. So again, this is another ranking one, which is of your priorities. We're seeing some interest in those larger to medium projects with new infrastructure rising to the top. All right, in about 10, 15 more seconds if you want to do your final ranking and then hit submit. Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for participating in that. And Lydia, with that, I'll go ahead and hand back to you.
Great. Thanks for your input. What I'm going to show you next is some of the examples of what we're starting to do as we're putting together these alternatives. So example one here is in the Cambria area. This would be a small local use where you would pick up San Simeon and Cambria, help serve some of the demands that they have for supply need. They have a local drought issue that currently they have unreliable water supply at all times. So there is a real need there. So that's the benefits. Limitations of a small project like this is that it doesn't have a lot of larger regional benefit. It's really just serving those two users. It would need a new outfall. As I mentioned before, this is a very small outfall here, but maybe one of those alternative technologies might be a good option up here when they start becoming more developed. Again, there is some sensitive aquatic habitat and protected areas up here. If you remember the map I showed, there's some marine protected areas. So that is certainly a drawback of this area that we're going to have to look at closely. So that's an example of a kind of one end of our bookends of a small local project. And then I have my next slide is an example of a large regional project. So this one, for example, is located somewhere in South County, using the South Slow County outfall. It would have a lot of new infrastructure to tie in regional users throughout the county. So it would have large regional use and meets partner demands for supplies and needs, and could provide drought resiliency as well as provide water to offset some groundwater use to work on our groundwater sustainability. But the downsides of it are that, yes, you need a lot of new infrastructure. We're showing a pipeline to San Luis Obispo and all the way out to Los Osos, and there are some local hazards in the area. Down by South Slow County, there's floodplain we need to be aware of and some protected areas. So again, those are the things we would need to be careful of as we're thinking about alternatives in that location. So this is these two are just examples of how we're starting to formulate alternatives. So really what we're doing next is the development and the rough screening of the alternatives. And this is going to include consideration of a number of different metrics and evaluation criteria, including demands that could be served in million gallons a day, the infrastructure that would be needed for each alternative, the length, size, the treatment size, outfall considerations, which we've talked a little bit about already. Do we need a new outfall? Is there an existing one? Is there available flow? How much capacity is available? Local impacts, environmental neighbor issues. Are there hazards we need to avoid? And then starting to look at implementation concerns. How complex is it going to be to try to do a project like this? So those are some of the screening criteria we intend to use for the alternatives, but we're going to, again, pause and let you weigh in on feasibility criteria. Oh, yeah, sorry, here, keep going. So the next slide, I jumped ahead. So again, we showed this slide before, but what we're talking about now is the rough screening of once we have our 12 concept alternatives, how are we screening down to 5? And so I shared the criteria we've been thinking about, but we want to hear from you. So that's the next slide.
Thanks, Lydia. Again, joining, I see a few more of you have joined onto the Mentimeter using the QR code or website. So just jump on there. So this is a little different from the criteria you ranked earlier. So we're talking feasibility criteria that are important to you and thinking about desalination. And again, you get to rank them, move them around. We know it's challenging sometimes to pick one thing over another, but helpful to think about. And I'll give you about a minute and a half more on that. And if you need to, the information on how to join is in the chat again. We're seeing location, water rate impacts rising up towards our top 2. Followed close behind by energy and environmental impacts. Got about another 20 seconds, so if you want to continue ranking and then make sure you hit submit on that. We've got another question to follow this one. All right. Okay, thanks for giving input on that question. And our next question, I'm going to move the QR code quickly this time, just since it's definitely in the way. So based on what you learned today and what Lydia just covered, which desalination sites look promising to you? So we heard comments earlier about a site someone wasn't interested in. So you have that option of picking one site all the way up to 6, but show the ones that are look promising to you. With some interest in South Flow County and Napomo Mesa. A bit of a mixed bag in north, some interest in the northern coast too. Great, yeah, thanks everyone for giving input onto this. I'm going to give you about another 10 seconds because I can see some of you are still right in the middle of responding to those. All right, so make sure you hit send on those. And with that, I'm going to move us on to the last few slides we have for you. Don't worry, Mark and Judy, we did not forget about you. Let's see. All right. Well, thanks everyone. So I know some of you might not be able to stay all the way till 7, so we wanted to cover the next steps and how you can stay involved before we'll do a quick closeout survey on how tonight went for you, and then have an open Q&A after that. But let's go ahead and make sure that you all know how to stay involved, and we really appreciate you being here tonight and being a part of the conversation and helping to give some of that early insight. So we're just, as of this last few minutes of the meeting, closing out our first engagement session with the community. The technical team will then continue to go on and do that alternative development and some of that screening that Lydia just described. And then early in 2026, we'll be coming back to do another community engagement session. Another chance to dig into some of the details and the finer thinking of those alternatives at that time. So those are two bigger opportunities for you to be involved. And then along the way, Courtney mentioned earlier on that there's something called the Water Resource Advisory Committee. So that's a public meeting. They inform the County Board of Supervisors related to water. And so that is another opportunity where you could show up. They're virtual or in person. And so in October and then later on in 2026, there'll be several opportunities to go to those meetings as well if you want to listen and learn more or give input. And the project will culminate with a presentation to the County Board of Supervisors in fall 2026. The date's still yet to be set for that. And let me move on to this next one. So very specifically, if you want to keep staying involved, you may have already been able to join the email list for this project. If you haven't already, I would ask that you go do that right now while we're closing out the meeting. So just go to the website highlighted on the screen, www.slocounty.ca.gov/DESAL. On that page, you'll find frequently asked questions, and as you scroll towards the bottom, there'll be a way of joining the email list. So you want to go down to that and put your email in, join us, and that'll be a way of staying informed as the project moves along. Also on that same website, you'll find a link to a survey that we have open right now where you can give a little bit more detailed input than we did tonight, and that'll be open until September 22nd. So if you have friends who want to give input, pass this along to them too, other community members, and we hope that you'll take that as well. Some different questions than you had tonight. And then as I mentioned, there's the opportunity to attend the Public Water Resource Advisory Committee meetings. So the next one is on October 1st. And Joey has kindly just put all of these links into the chat, so you can just copy those right into your browser and click on them. And we'll ask that, show up to any of those you're interested in. And when we set our community engagement session and post future project surveys, we hope that you'll participate in all of them. As Lydia and Courtney both mentioned, this is really early phase thinking around desalination. And so your input matters and is helping to shape this effort around all of these fronts. So with that, before I open up for Q&A, would love to get your thoughts. Always important for us to check in. We want to make sure we used your time wisely. And so there's a last 2 questions on the Mentimeter survey you'll find tonight are really saying, how do we do at meeting some of those purpose statements I talked about early on? So you can rate this from strongly disagree to strongly agree or anywhere in between. Would love to see your feedback on that as we're moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a few minutes, and don't worry, we won't be offended. So just respond honestly. I realize it's giving live updates as we're talking about it. So I'm going to give you about another minute on this one. And this will help as we start shaping the next community session too. The next question will give you some open forum where you can give us other thoughts. And that'll help us as we put together that second session towards later on in the study and what might be helpful for all of you. And what we'll go ahead and do is while you all are filling this out, Joey, if you want to enable the chat again, and then also the question. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I think you'll still be able to respond to these questions. And you'll see, again, if you didn't get to say something you really wanted to say, there's an open forum question on the Mentimeter. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I think if we could, Lydia, you touched briefly on it, but maybe Courtney and Lydia, if you wanted to, there's an early question about the cost of projects. So maybe if you just want to speak to that, since in case that person didn't hear the response already.
Did you want to take that, Courtney? Or I think there was a question about dollar per acre foot, and I think I tried to address it during the presentation, but we're not there yet.
You're right. Yeah, I maybe what we can do is on our website link to other studies that have been done that were, but yeah, later in our process, when we get to those 5 alternatives, that's when they'll be able to actually develop the cost estimates for those, for the range of water supply concepts that they would generate.
Great, thank you. Just want to make, in case they hadn't caught that. All right, with that, we've had Mark so patiently waiting. Joey, I'm wondering if you can ask Mark to unmute, please.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. All right, Mark, you're all set. You should be able to unmute now.
Yep, thank you very much. Very good presentation. I'm Mark Lambert. I'm formerly the CEO of IDE. I was responsible for the Carlsbad project and the Santa Barbara one. So there's an example of a regional one and a kind of local one. I encourage you to everyone to continue to do the community outreaches like you're doing here. I sit, by the way, on the California DESAL Association Board of Directors. I'm a huge fan of desalination as part of a balanced water portfolio. So all of the things you talked about, Lydia, alternatives such as wastewater recycling, reuse, groundwater augmentation, conservation that the districts already are doing. You need all of that to create this so-called balanced water portfolio. It was extremely successful for the county of San Diego, where the largest facility still exists and has been operational for more than a decade. I'm offering help, guidance, I'm in the sort of tail end of my career, if you will, and I'm happy to provide guidance and support and coaching for this project. I would say that a decade out, my instinct is that the ocean plan amendment, which is how we are managing the intake and the outfall, will change significantly and may not be as stringent as it is now. And so just keep doing what you're doing. Call out to the local people who have already done it. I've made every mistake there is to make in the industry and happy to share lessons learned along the way. And I'll stop there and just say to Lydia, say hello to Andy for me from Mark Lambert.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I appreciate that connection to the other work that's been done. Anything, Courtney?
Let me add one other thing is all of the alternatives to land-based desalination companies that were present today, and you showed a great slide. Those are all things that should be considered as well. And all of them are at least in pilot phase and look extremely promising, albeit maybe relatively smaller volumes of water, but all those should be considered also in the alternatives. So for me, that's it. Thanks for a great presentation and look forward to helping however I can.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, definitely learning from others was a big part of trying to do our best to approach this feasibility study in a way that integrated a lot of those lessons learned, trying to be realistic about schedule, trying to be proactive about getting community engagement going and getting everyone's input along the way, starting with big picture ideas and trying to find a way to kind of hone in, but also staying, open because things change, like you're saying with the regulations, people's needs, weather. So yeah, trying to stay, more of like a living document or a living ongoing conversation to be as ready as possible when communities want to step forward and go forward with this kind of a project.
Thanks. I'm going to go to one in the chat, and then maybe we can go to Judy after that, Joey. So I see a question from Martin, and I'm not sure we've gotten to hear from him yet. So regarding the Nipomo Phillips 66 refinery site, given that the refinery is now being deconstructed, how realistic politically and logistically is it to purchase that property for desalination versus State Park's stated goal to obtain it?
Yeah, so we have one of our county planners is engaged in that process. And so as we're basically, writing up all the opportunities and limitations with that particular alternative, we'll work in close collaboration with our planning department liaison to reflect what we know in the near term, but then also, noting that there are some unknowns because they're going through a process. And so we just need to kind of adapt as we learn more about what they're going through.
Thanks, Courtney. All right, Joey.
All right. Okay, Judy Lynn, I believe you should be able to unmute now.
Yes, thank you. Your report was wonderful. Your visuals were so helpful and thorough, and you guys are to be commended for that. I have a question about location feasibility and, your visual you put up. And one of the things that I saw missing was some type of report that gathered community input about this. And I feel like when it makes sense when you're starting a project and you're going to include the location of something in a community, the number one thing you would want to do is go and talk to the property owners who have invested so much time, energy, and money into their community. I could be wrong, but I could have missed something, but I didn't see any kind of graph that showed community input about their site, as their city or community being a location site. And then my other question, so if you do have that or a plan for that, I would like to hear it. And then my other question is, regarding the pie graph that you put up, and it had such a small, I believe the smallest little sliver was interest in DESAL, and maybe I read that wrong. I don't know, but does it make sense to go forward with a big project if you have such a little sliver of the pie interested? So correct me on that if I read it wrong, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. Courtney, you want to tee off on that?
Sure. So we have a survey going, and I envision that when we write up these alternatives, because we'll eventually have to write them and describe them, all of the survey input, the input we're getting tonight, communications with the partner water agencies, including, the City of Morro Bay. We meet with all of the water agency partners that kind of communicate what they hear as well. All of that would go into the description of concerns around or benefits, depending on what the input is, into those descriptions for each of those alternatives. So I see it showing up in the narrative that we write up, and our review of the survey input, as well as just direct communication with the various community representatives that we're working with through the plan partnership. And then going from there, we have our additional community engagement that we'll need to frame up once we kind of get a sense of how things are looking based on all of the input we're getting in this period. So that's how I'm thinking we'll be able to leverage all the input we're getting through the surveys and the various mechanisms. And your point about, some communities have a good understanding based on the conditions of their water supplies now, and others, it's more about what if things change, what if things get worse. So it's a little bit harder to put a number to that. And so that's why in developing the alternatives, we're kind of looking, at small, medium, and large benefits or quantities of water to evaluate that a desal facility might produce. So, that's why we have that go, no go, where, until, folks want to keep going because there'll be a next level of detail and effort. So we'll kind of get a sense at the end of the study next year, whether the communities want to move forward and maybe have a better understanding. Again, that living document, ongoing conversation idea of, making updates as we can, as we understand more and have more discussions with all the communities.
Maybe, do you want to add anything? Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Judy, and thanks for bringing that forward, and Courtney for that. We have another question in here from Keith. Several questions. So how many facilities are you looking at building? How many gallons are there for daily goal, and what would funding sources be? So I don't know if Lydia and Courtney, if you want to tag team that question. Series of questions.
I think we're, trying to think of how to frame this. We're using this process to get a sense of what the community is, would want to move forward with, or what would need to be true to move forward. Is it multiple facilities? Is it just one that serves the needs? Maybe it'll be screened down, to one because of all the complexities of some of the other sites. So it might just end up being one. So we're going to go through this process to try to get a better sense of how many there would be. Most likely it would be one regional facility on the eventually, but it doesn't mean that there couldn't be more than one. So it's just, we're not sure yet. And then, so we're also trying to evaluate different alternatives in terms of sizing. So that speaks to how much water would be produced. And then funding strategies for this type of a project include going after grants for capital, but you also need the ongoing O&M, operation and maintenance costs covered. So the determining who would participate eventually and who would benefit, that would be who would need to be, voting for, water rate increases or other funding mechanisms to be able to implement that project and through partnerships. So probably a variety of funding sources would be needed, but you definitely need an ongoing funding source, typically through water rates for operation and maintenance.
Okay, thanks, Courtney. Anything to add, Lydia?
Well, one thing I think that I forgot to mention earlier is that by doing the Bureau of Reclamation feasibility study, you actually are taking the first step towards getting grant funding for pursuing a project. So once you have a feasibility study accepted by the Bureau, then you can start applying for grant funds for implementation.
Thanks, Lydia. All right. Well, and I'm going to ask you one of the last questions that we have at the moment. And for anyone else, we've still got about 5 minutes or so left. So if you have any more, drop them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So we have a question from Sarah. What is the ratio of water produced to water needed to dilute outfall for an average facility?
And I'm not sure if this question is asking about the outfall, yes, it sounds like how much to dilute. I'm not sure that we have an exact number calculated at this point, and given that there's not a lot of large wastewater treatment plants in SLO County to be able to provide that dilution, it probably is going to be less than what most people would want anyway. But the whole idea is if you have some fresh wastewater, it's going to help make that salty brine less salty as you're discharging it. So we don't have a particular goal that we're looking at. We're just trying to meet that requirement of if we can have some dilution.
Thanks, Liz. Okay, great. And Joey, are you seeing any more questions coming in or hands raised?
Yeah, Carolyn, looks like we covered all the questions in the chat so far, and I don't see any additional hands raised.
Great. All right. Well, if you think of any more questions, there's always the option to, I believe, the county on the same website, which is earlier in the chat. So that's slowcounty.ca.gov/DESAL. You'll find frequently asked questions there, and you can always submit other questions or thoughts about the project. Thank you for adding that again, Joey, as they come up. So certainly this is meant to be an ongoing conversation over the coming year. And we really appreciate all of your time and your being here for 2 hours with us, learning about water, talking about water and DESAL. Just so amazing to have so many interested people. And hopefully you can pass along the note about the survey being open to your neighbors and friends and colleagues. And then this was recorded tonight. And so this and the slides, including all of your input, will be posted to the website and available for others to watch. Courtney or Lydia, any final closing thoughts tonight?
Yeah, just a big thank you. And I just appreciate you engaging and continuing to engage and have this conversation with us and weighing in. We saw in the beginning, water is precious and vital to everyone and everything. So, but it's challenging. It's a challenging decision to make. We'll just work on diversifying our portfolio.
And I'll just add on to kind of echo back to Judy's comments about needing to talk to communities. That's why we're doing this tonight. And please let your friends and neighbors know that we're doing this study and we want your feedback.
Thank you both. And thanks everyone for being here tonight. I hope you have a great rest of your evening and make sure to go join the email list so that you can, just like Lydia said, join us for all those future opportunities.
Great night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.